I asked when the wedding is, and my only son said, "We got married yesterday." The problem wasn't just that he'd gotten married without telling me. The problem was the way he said, "we," like it was a fortress I could never enter. The problem was how Jennifer had convinced my son that his mother, the woman who raised him alone after his father died, was somehow too much trouble for their special day. Have you ever felt the ground shift under your feet while someone acted like nothing had changed? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. I had been saving for years, tucking away every receipt and polishing the family heirloom ring my husband gave me before he passed. So when I asked my only son, "When is the wedding?" I expected a date, maybe even a smile. Instead, he said flatly, "We got married yesterday." My heart froze. There had been no invitation, no photos, no chance to witness the moment I had dreamed of since he was a boy. By nightfall, whispers reached me. The courthouse papers in Clark County, Nevada, were stamped in a hurry, filed under a joint name that erased me as next of kin. That wasn't just a marriage, it was a legal lockout. In the weeks after, I noticed strange calls, letters addressed to the new family, and documents shifting ownership of property I had built my life around in Oregon. It didn't take long to see the pattern. His new wife was not only keeping me from the wedding, but using paperwork to edge me out of everything. But one thing she didn't expect was my calm persistence. Quietly, I began pulling land deeds, bank notices, and archived emails. I found a draft marriage certificate with a suspicious timestamp, showing it had been altered after the filing date. It was no longer just about my son's sudden wedding, it was about reclaiming the truth before I was erased from my own legacy. When I asked my son about the wedding date, he looked at me like I was already dead. "We got married yesterday," he said, and my world cracked open. I was standing in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, holding the velvet ring box I'd kept safe for 3 years. Inside was my grandmother's diamond, the one my husband slipped on my finger 42 years ago, the one I'd polished just that weekend. My son Marcus sat at the breakfast table, stirring his coffee with the same mechanical motion he'd used as a child when he was avoiding eye contact. "Yesterday?" The word came out as a whisper. The ring box felt heavier in my hands. He wouldn't look up from his cup. "Jennifer thought it would be easier this way. Just the two of us, you know. No fuss. No fuss." 40 years of raising him, of saving every dollar for his future, of dreaming about walking him down an aisle somewhere, and it was reduced to no fuss. Have you ever saved for years for a moment that was stolen from you? Have you ever felt the ground shift under your feet while someone acted like nothing had changed? That's exactly what Tuesday morning felt like, watching my son destroy my heart with the same casual tone he'd used to discuss the weather. The coffee in his cup had gone cold. The ring box clicked shut in my palm. Outside, Oregon's morning rain tapped against the kitchen window, but inside, the silence stretched between us like a chasm neither of us knew how to cross. "Where?" I managed to ask. "Clark County, Nevada." He finally looked up, and his eyes held something I'd never seen before, guilt mixed with defiance. "It's done, Mom. We're married." The problem wasn't just that he'd gotten married without telling me. The problem was the way he said, "we," like it was a fortress I could never enter. The problem was how Jennifer had convinced my son that his mother, the woman who raised him alone after his father died, was somehow too much trouble for their special day. But here's what neither of them expected: I don't break easily. I bend, I absorb, I observe. While Marcus sat there stirring cold coffee and avoiding my eyes, I was already calculating. Something felt wrong about the rush, about the secrecy, about the way he couldn't meet my gaze. If someone erased you from the biggest day of your child's life, you'd want answers. Subscribe now, this gets deeper than anyone expected. That afternoon, I called Ruth from next door. "Can you come over? I need someone to look at something." When she arrived, I showed her the envelope that had come that morning, the one addressed to the new family, at my address, with my street number, but not my name. Ruth read it twice before setting it down on my kitchen table. "Honey," she said quietly, "when did you sign papers about your property?" I stared at her. I didn't. That night, whispers reached me about courthouse papers filed under joint names, names that made me legally invisible. Comment, invisible, if you've ever been excluded from family decisions without warning. The house felt different when I returned from that conversation. Every family photo seemed to mock me, moments I thought mattered, now feeling like lies. I walked through rooms that had held 40 years of memories, and everything looked smaller somehow. The dining room table where Marcus had done his homework every night through high school. The living room couch where we'd watched movies together during his college breaks. The mantel where his graduation photos sat next to his father's military portrait. All of it felt hollow now. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my husband's old chair, the recliner that still smelled faintly of his aftershave even 5 years after the funeral. The tea grew cold while I stared at the wedding favors I'd been secretly preparing, small boxes of mints with Marcus and Jennifer, printed in gold script, ordered 3 months ago when I thought I'd be included in their plans. 200 favor boxes. $47 each for centerpiece flowers I'd already paid for. A dress hanging in my closet with the tag still on, navy blue with lace sleeves, because Jennifer had once mentioned she liked elegant mothers of the groom. The phone sat silent on the side table. No congratulations calls from relatives. No excited chatter about honeymoon plans. No one asking for family recipes or discussing photo arrangements. Just silence. That's when I noticed the mail stack I'd ignored during Marcus's visit. Bills, advertisements, and something else, an envelope with my address but different names. Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Johnson Reed, at 847 Maple Drive. My address, but I'd never seen that hyphenated name before. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a property transfer notification. My property. My address. But according to the paperwork, ownership had been transferred to the new family trust, with Marcus Johnson Reed and Jennifer Johnson Reed as primary beneficiaries. I read it 3 times before the words made sense. Someone was trying to transfer my house, the house I'd lived in for 38 years, the house my husband and I had bought when Marcus was 2 years old, into a trust that didn't include me. The signature at the bottom looked almost like mine. Almost. But the M in Margaret was wrong. I'd signed my name thousands of times, and I knew my own handwriting. This wasn't it. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own home after betrayal? I set the document on the kitchen table next to the cold tea and the unopened wedding favors. Tomorrow, I'd call Ruth. Tomorrow, I'd start asking questions. But that night, I sat in my husband's chair and wondered how long this had been planned. The envelope was addressed to the new family, at my address, but not my name. I wasn't looking for evidence when I opened my mail that morning. But there it was, a property transfer notice I never signed, bearing my forged signature. Wednesday brought more mail, and this time I was ready for it. 3 envelopes arrived with my address but different names. I opened each one carefully, like a detective handling evidence. The first was from First National Bank. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Johnson Reed, it began, thank you for updating your beneficiary information on account ending in 7743. My checking account. The one I'd opened in 1987. According to the letter, I'd changed the primary beneficiary from Marcus Johnson, son, to Jennifer Johnson Reed, spouse, and removed myself as account holder. The date on the change? 2 weeks before the wedding I didn't know was happening. The second envelope came from my insurance company. Policy modification complete, the form letter announced. My life insurance policy, the one that was supposed to secure Marcus's future if something happened to me, had been changed. The beneficiary was no longer my son. It was Jennifer Johnson Reed, with full payout authority. The modification date? 3 weeks ago. The third envelope made my hands shake. It was from the county assessor's office, confirming a joint ownership transfer for my property. The house my husband and I had scraped together to buy, the house where I'd raised Marcus, the house that held every memory we'd built as a family, it was now owned by Johnson Reed Family Trust. My signature was on every form. Except it wasn't my signature. Screenshot those document details in your mind. You'll need them later. I spread all 3 documents across my kitchen table and studied the signatures. Someone had tried to copy my handwriting, but they'd made mistakes. The way I loop my G in Margaret. The slant of my R in Reed. The pressure I put on the pen when I cross my T's. These signatures looked close, but they weren't mine. More importantly, the dates told a story. Someone had been systematically changing my legal documents for weeks before the wedding, preparing to lock me out of my own life. Property theft through paperwork happens to thousands yearly. Subscribe to see how she fights back, before it's too late for your family too. I called Ruth immediately. "Bring those papers over here right now," she said when I explained what I'd found. Ruth had worked as a paralegal for 32 years before retiring. If anyone could spot legal fraud, it was her. 20 minutes later, we sat at her dining room table with all 3 documents spread out like puzzle pieces. Ruth examined each signature through her reading glasses, comparing them to my real signature on a birthday card I'd given her last month. "Margaret," she said finally, looking up at me with grim determination, "these are forgeries. Professional ones, but forgeries." She pointed to the dates with her pen. "Look at this timeline. Property transfer filed September 15th, insurance change September 8th, bank modification September 1st. Your son's wedding was September 20th. The pattern was clear. Someone had spent 3 weeks systematically stealing my legal identity before the wedding ever happened. The notary date was impossible. It was signed 2 days before they even met. "Ruth," I said quietly, "what do we do?" She was already reaching for her phone. "We call my old boss. And we make copies of everything before they realize you found out." My neighbor Ruth read the documents without speaking. When she looked up, her eyes held the fury I couldn't yet feel. "Margaret, this isn't just fraud," Ruth said, setting down her reading glasses. "This is identity theft with intent to commit elder abuse. In Oregon, this carries serious criminal penalties." We were sitting at her oak dining table, the same table where she'd helped me fill out Medicare paperwork after my husband died, where we'd planned neighborhood block parties, where she'd listened to me worry about Marcus during his difficult teenage years. Now that same table held evidence that someone was trying to steal my life. Ruth pulled out a yellow legal pad. The kind she'd used during her 32 years as a paralegal, and started making notes. "Tell me about Jennifer. When did Marcus meet her?" 6 months ago. Maybe 7. I tried to remember the first time he'd mentioned her name. He said she worked in real estate. Something about helping people with estate planning. Ruth's pen stopped moving. "Estate planning?" "That's what he said. She helped families organize their financial futures." The words sounded different now, loaded with new meaning. Ruth circled something on her notepad. "Margaret, real estate agents don't usually handle estate planning unless they're also attorneys or financial advisors. What exactly does Jennifer do for work?" I realized I didn't know. In 6 months of my son dating this woman, I'd never gotten a clear answer about her job. Marcus had been vague, and I'd been too polite to press for details. "We need to find out," Ruth said. "And we need to protect these documents before they disappear." She stood up and walked to her home office, returning with a portable scanner. "I'm making copies of everything. Multiple copies. Then we're driving to the bank to put originals in a safety deposit box. Tag someone who would help you fight document fraud. That's real friendship." While Ruth scanned each document, I watched her work with the same methodical precision she'd brought to every legal case during her career. She wasn't panicking or getting emotional. She was building a case. "Here's what we know," she said, organizing the copies into neat stacks. "Someone with access to your personal information has been forging your signature for weeks. They've targeted your biggest assets: house, bank account, life insurance. The timing coincides with your son's relationship and sudden marriage." She looked at me directly. "The question is, did Marcus know?" That was the question I'd been avoiding. My son had always been trusting, maybe too trusting. But could he be part of something this calculated? Ruth kept copies of everything. We'll need proof before they destroy the originals. What's our next step? I asked. Ruth was already putting on her coat. We're going to the bank. Today. Before anyone realizes you found out. The drive took 12 minutes. It would change everything. The bank manager's face changed when she pulled up my account history. Mrs. Johnson, when did you authorize these beneficiary changes? Karen Williams had been my bank manager for 8 years. She knew me, knew my habits, knew that I never made major financial decisions without careful consideration. When Ruth and I walked into her office that Thursday morning, I could see the concern in her eyes before we even sat down. I didn't authorize anything, I said, placing the bank notification letter on her desk. That's not my signature. Karen studied the document, then turned to her computer screen. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, pulling up records I couldn't see. The longer she looked, the deeper her frown became. Mrs. Johnson, according to our records, you came in on September 1st at 2:47 p.m. to make these changes. You provided proper identification and signed the modification forms in person. My stomach dropped. Karen, I was never here on September 1st. I was in Portland that day visiting my cousin Helen. She had surgery, remember? I told you about it the week before. Karen's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. She turned her monitor toward us so we could see the screen. There, in the bank security log, was an entry showing that Margaret Johnson had visited the branch, provided identification, and signed beneficiary modification forms. I need to see the security footage from that day, Ruth said, her paralegal training taking over. Karen hesitated. I'm not sure I can. Karen, I interrupted, my voice steady but firm. Someone used my identity to steal access to my life savings. I think that gives me the right to see who walked into your bank claiming to be me. Elder fraud costs families billions. If you're not watching for these warning signs, subscribe, learn them before someone targets your loved ones. It took Karen 20 minutes to retrieve the footage. When she finally turned her computer screen toward us, we saw a woman approaching the teller window at 2:47 p.m. on September 1st. She had brown hair like mine, similar height, and was wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low. But it wasn't me. That woman is at least 20 years younger than me, I said, staring at the screen. Look at how she walks, how she moves her hands. Nothing about her is me. Karen rewound the footage and played it again. This time, she focused on the signature moment. The woman signed the forms quickly, confidently, like someone who had practiced. Ruth leaned forward. Karen, what identification did she provide? Karen checked her records. Driver's license and social security card. Both of which can be forged, Ruth said grimly. Especially if someone has access to Margaret's personal information. The security footage from the signature date showed someone else entirely. Karen printed out copies of everything, the fraudulent signature, the security footage timestamp, the identification records. Mrs. Johnson, I'm flagging your accounts immediately. No changes can be made without you appearing in person with 2 forms of photo ID. As we left the bank, Ruth was already planning our next move. We're going to the police station. Then we're calling the district attorney's office. But first, I had a phone call to make. Predict, will the bank help prosecute, or protect their own liability? This isn't amateur hour, the attorney said, spreading the documents across her desk. This is systematic identity theft disguised as family planning. Attorney Sarah Chen had handled elder abuse cases for 15 years. Ruth's former boss had recommended her, saying she was the toughest lawyer in Portland when it came to protecting seniors from financial fraud. Sitting in her downtown office that Friday morning, I could see why. Sarah examined each document with a magnifying glass, making notes on a yellow pad. She studied the forged signatures, checked the dates against a calendar, and reviewed the bank security footage on her laptop. Mrs. Johnson, someone spent considerable time preparing for this fraud. They studied your signature, practiced it, obtained false identification, and executed a coordinated attack on your major assets over a 3-week period. She pointed to the timeline Ruth had created. Property transfer, insurance modification, bank changes, then the marriage. This wasn't random or impulsive. This was planned. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means we can prove intent to commit elder abuse, which is a felony in Oregon. It also means we can file for emergency asset protection while we investigate. Sarah pulled out a thick legal manual and flipped to a marked page. Oregon Revised Statute 124.100 specifically addresses financial abuse of elderly persons. The penalties include restitution, criminal prosecution, and civil damages. She looked at me directly. The person who did this could face up to 5 years in prison and be required to pay back triple the amount they stole. Ruth leaned forward. What about Margaret's son? He married this woman. Is he involved? Sarah's expression softened slightly. That's what we need to find out. Sometimes family members are co-conspirators. Sometimes they're victims too, manipulated into cooperation. The thought of Marcus being a victim felt almost worse than thinking he'd betrayed me. My son wasn't stupid, but he'd always been trusting. Had Jennifer convinced him this was normal? Had she lied to him too? Here's what we're going to do, Sarah said, pulling out a fresh legal pad. First, we file an emergency petition to freeze all assets and reverse all fraudulent transactions. Second, we request a police investigation for identity theft and elder abuse. Third, we send a preservation notice to all involved parties, requiring them to maintain all documents and communications. She started writing as she talked. The preservation notice is crucial. It prevents them from destroying evidence and puts them on legal notice that they're being investigated. How long does this take? I asked. The emergency petition can be filed today and heard by Monday. Once a judge sees this evidence. Sarah gestured to the pile of documents. I'm confident we'll get immediate relief. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Judge Morrison's clerk? This is Sarah Chen. I need an emergency hearing for elder abuse and asset protection. Yes, I'll have the papers filed within the hour. The preservation order was filed quietly. Now we wait to see if they notice. When Sarah hung up, she looked at both Ruth and me with professional confidence. Mrs. Johnson, by Monday afternoon, your assets will be protected and your identity will be restored. But I need you to understand something important. What's that? Once we file these papers, everyone involved will know you're fighting back. They may try to contact you, pressure you, or even threaten you. Don't engage with them directly. Refer everything to me. As we left Sarah's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks, hope mixed with determination. Justice moves fast when evidence is solid. Subscribe to see how preparation beats manipulation, every single time. I found it where I always kept important papers, the original will that protected everything. Someone had replaced it with a version that gave them control. Saturday morning, I decided to organize all my legal documents before Monday's court hearing. I went to my bedroom closet and pulled out the metal filing box where I'd kept important papers for 20 years. The box sat on the shelf next to my winter coats, locked with a small key I kept in my jewelry drawer. Inside should have been my will, my husband's will, our marriage certificate, the house deed, and various insurance policies. Everything looked normal at first glance, the same manila folders, the same rubber-banded stacks of papers. But something felt wrong. I pulled out the folder labeled, Will, Margaret Johnson, and opened it. The document inside was typed on the same legal letterhead as my original will, dated the same date, signed with what looked like my signature. But it wasn't the will I'd signed. In my original will, I'd left everything to Marcus with clear instructions. If he died before me, everything would go to his children. If he had no children, my estate would be donated to the local animal shelter where my husband had volunteered. This version was different. It named Marcus as primary beneficiary, but included a clause I'd never seen before. In the event of beneficiary marriage, all assets shall transfer to joint ownership with spouse, with full rights of survivorship. What family document would you check first if you suspected fraud? I read that clause 3 times before the meaning sank in. According to this version of my will, the moment Marcus got married, Jennifer would automatically inherit half of everything I owned. If something happened to Marcus, she'd get it all. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of every page, then called Ruth. They changed my will, I said when she answered. What do you mean changed it? Someone replaced my original will with a modified version. A version that gives Jennifer automatic inheritance rights the moment she married Marcus. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Margaret, do you have a copy of your original will anywhere else? I thought about it. My attorney should have a copy. Richard Stevenson. He drew up the original 5 years ago after Tom died. Call him. Now. Before Monday's hearing. Richard Stevenson had been my husband's friend and our family attorney for 12 years. When I reached him at home Saturday evening, he was immediately concerned. Margaret, I've been wondering when I'd hear from you. Someone called my office 2 months ago claiming to be you, asking for copies of your will and other estate documents. My blood went cold. I never called your office. I know. That's why I didn't send anything. The voice was wrong, and the woman couldn't answer basic questions about your family history. I made a note in your file about the suspicious call. Richard, I need to know, do you have my original will? Of course. It's in your file, along with my notes about the suspicious call. Why? I told him about the modified version I'd found in my home filing box. The witness signatures were traced from an old Christmas card. They used my own family against me. Margaret, Richard said grimly, bring that fake will to my office first thing Monday morning. Before your court hearing. We're going to need it as evidence. Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow would determine whether I could reclaim my life, or lose everything I'd worked for. The judge's gavel came down with one word, granted. The asset freeze was in place. Judge Morrison's courtroom felt larger than I'd expected. Sarah Chen had prepared me for the hearing, but sitting in the front row Monday morning, listening to her present evidence of the systematic fraud against me, I felt both relieved and terrified. Sarah moved through the evidence methodically, the forged signatures, the bank security footage, the falsified will, the suspicious timeline. She presented each document clearly, explaining how someone had spent weeks preparing to steal my identity and assets. Your Honor, Sarah said, Mrs. Johnson's case represents a textbook example of elder financial abuse. The defendant used intimate knowledge of family relationships to execute a sophisticated fraud scheme targeting the victim's most valuable assets. Jennifer's attorney, a young man in an expensive suit, tried to argue that the changes were legitimate. Your Honor, these appear to be normal estate planning modifications made by a woman preparing for her son's marriage. Judge Morrison looked at him over her glasses. Counselor, your client is suggesting that Mrs. Johnson made these modifications using forged signatures and false identification while visiting multiple institutions on dates when she can prove she was elsewhere? The attorney had no good answer for that. Judge Morrison reviewed the bank security footage on her computer, compared the signature samples, and studied the timeline Sarah had prepared. The deliberation took less than 10 minutes. Mrs. Johnson, the judge said, looking directly at me, I'm granting your petition for emergency asset protection. All property transfers, beneficiary changes, and financial modifications made without your genuine consent are hereby frozen pending criminal investigation. She turned to Jennifer's attorney. Your client has 10 days to provide legitimate documentation for these transactions, or face criminal charges for elder abuse and identity theft. Ever felt the moment when justice finally listened? That's power. As we left the courthouse, Sarah explained what the order meant. Margaret, your house is back in your name only. Your bank accounts are restored to their original beneficiary designations. Your insurance policies are corrected. Everything they stole has been frozen and will be returned to you. But the victory felt incomplete. As we walked down the courthouse steps, Sarah's phone rang. She listened for a moment, then looked at me with concern. That was my office. Jennifer's attorney just filed a counterpetition claiming you're mentally incompetent and that Marcus signed consent forms for all the changes as your legal guardian. The celebration was brief. That afternoon, the counterattack began. Ruth grabbed my arm. "They're not giving up." "Neither am I said, and meant it. Justice needs preparation. Subscribe so you're ready when betrayal strikes." The harassment started immediately: late-night calls, property damage, and legal papers claiming I was mentally incompetent. Tuesday night, the phone rang at 2:17 a.m. When I answered, no one spoke, but I could hear breathing on the other end. The call lasted exactly 1 minute before they hung up. Wednesday night, 2:23 a.m. Same thing. Thursday morning, I found my mailbox knocked over and my garden hose cut in 3 pieces. Someone had also spray-painted "Crazy Old Lady" on my garage door in red letters. By Thursday afternoon, the legal papers arrived. Jennifer's attorney had filed a petition for emergency guardianship, claiming I was suffering from dementia and posed a danger to myself and others. According to their filing, Marcus had been forced to take protective measures to prevent me from squandering the family estate due to cognitive decline. The petition included an affidavit signed by Marcus stating that I'd been increasingly confused and paranoid over the past 6 months, that I'd made irrational financial decisions, and that I'd threatened violence against Jennifer. None of it was true. Ruth read the documents with increasing anger. "Margaret, they're trying to have you declared legally incompetent so they can control your assets as your guardians. Can they do that? Not if we can prove you're mentally competent. But they're forcing you to defend your own sanity in court." Sarah Chen was furious when I called her. This is a common tactic in elder abuse cases. When the initial fraud is exposed, perpetrators often claim the victim is mentally incompetent and that they were acting in the person's best interests. What do? We get you evaluated by an independent psychiatrist and neurologist. We document every instance of harassment. And we prepare for a fight. Friday brought more harassment. Someone called the local fire department claiming there was a gas leak at my address. When the fire trucks arrived and found nothing wrong, the captain apologized but warned me that false emergency calls were becoming a common harassment tactic. Saturday morning, my neighbor Tom found all 4 of my car tires slashed. How do you prove your own sanity when someone's trying to steal it legally? That's when I started documenting everything. Every phone call, every incident of property damage, every suspicious event. I took photos, wrote down times and dates, and kept a detailed log. Ruth installed a security camera pointing at my driveway and front door. If they're going to escalate, we need evidence. Sarah scheduled appointments with Dr. Patricia Webb, a geriatric psychiatrist, and Dr. Michael Torres, a neurologist who specialized in cognitive assessments. Both evaluations were set for the following week. "Margaret," Sarah explained, "these doctors will conduct comprehensive tests to evaluate your mental capacity, memory function, decision-making ability, and overall cognitive health. Their reports will be crucial evidence in court." But Jennifer's team wasn't finished. Monday morning brought their boldest move yet, a petition claiming that I'd been emotionally abusing Marcus for years and that the recent legal actions were proof of my vindictive and unstable personality. They were painting me as a bitter, delusional old woman who couldn't accept her son's happiness. The competency hearing was set for next week. They had no idea what evidence I'd gathered. The documents arrived by certified mail, requiring my signature for delivery. As I signed for them, I realized something important. Every piece of harassment, every false claim, every legal maneuver they made was creating a paper trail that would eventually expose their desperation. Family manipulation destroys trust for generations. Subscribe to learn the warning signs. Protect your relationships before it's too late. My doctor's testimony was 3 sentences long and devastated their entire case. She's cognitively sound, medically stable, and sharper than most people half her age. Dr. Patricia Webb had spent 4 hours evaluating me the previous Tuesday. Memory tests, cognitive assessments, problem-solving exercises, and detailed interviews about my recent experiences. She'd administered something called the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, along with tests for depression, anxiety, and decision-making capacity. Dr. Michael Torres had conducted neurological examinations, including brain imaging to rule out any signs of dementia or cognitive decline. Both doctors attended the competency hearing Thursday morning. Jennifer's attorney went first, reading Marcus's affidavit about my supposed mental decline. He painted a picture of a confused, paranoid woman who'd become increasingly irrational over the past months. "Your Honor," he said, "the evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Johnson is no longer capable of making sound financial decisions or recognizing the loving intentions of her family members." Then Sarah called Dr. Webb to the stand. "Doctor, what was your assessment of Mrs. Johnson's cognitive function?" Dr. Webb consulted her notes. Mrs. Johnson scored 29 out of 30 on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. A score of 26 or above indicates normal cognitive function. Her memory, attention, language abilities, and executive function are all within normal ranges for her age group. What about her decision-making capacity? Excellent. She demonstrated clear understanding of complex financial and legal concepts, showed appropriate emotional responses to stressful situations, and displayed logical thinking throughout our evaluation. Jennifer's attorney tried to challenge the findings. "Doctor, isn't it possible that someone with early-stage dementia could perform well on cognitive tests while still displaying poor judgment in real-world situations?" Dr. Webb looked at him directly. "In Mrs. Johnson's case, her recent actions demonstrate exceptional judgment. She recognized suspicious activity, gathered evidence systematically, sought appropriate professional help, and pursued legal remedies through proper channels. Those are the actions of someone with excellent cognitive function." Dr. Torres testified next about the neurological examination. Brain imaging shows no signs of dementia, stroke damage, or cognitive impairment. Mrs. Johnson's neurological function is consistent with healthy aging. Medical records don't lie. What other evidence speaks for itself? But the most devastating testimony came when Sarah introduced the handwriting analysis. Document examiner Linda Martinez had compared the signatures on all the fraudulent papers with samples of my genuine handwriting spanning 10 years. Using magnification and computer analysis, she'd identified multiple inconsistencies. The questioned signatures show evidence of tracing and simulation, Martinez testified. They were created by someone attempting to copy Mrs. Johnson's handwriting, but several characteristics prove they are forgeries. She projected enlarged images of the signatures on the courtroom screen, pointing out differences in pen pressure, letter formation, and stroke patterns. The handwriting expert's conclusion was definitive: these signatures are traced forgeries. Judge Morrison listened to all the testimony before making her ruling. "Based on the medical evidence presented, I find no basis for a competency determination. Mrs. Johnson is clearly capable of making her own legal and financial decisions. The petition for guardianship is denied." Can family bonds survive this level of deception? What would you do? Jennifer's attorney was already packing his briefcase when the judge delivered the final blow. "Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for criminal investigation." When my son saw the forged documents with his wife's real signature underneath, his face went white. "Mom, I had no idea." Marcus sat across from me at Ruth's dining table Friday evening, 2 days after the competency hearing. Sarah Chen had suggested we meet somewhere neutral, away from the drama that had consumed my house for weeks. Ruth had made coffee and quietly left us alone. I spread the documents across the table like cards in a deadly game. The forged property transfer. The fake bank signature. The modified will. And underneath each one, Sarah's investigator had found something that made my heart break and soar at the same time. Jennifer's real signature on the notary applications. "She applied to become a notary 3 months before we started dating," I said, watching Marcus study the papers. "She used that authority to notarize her own forgeries of my signature." Marcus picked up the property transfer document and held it under Ruth's desk lamp. "This says you signed it on September 15th. I was in Portland with cousin Helen that day. You drove me there yourself, remember? Helen's hip surgery?" His hands were shaking now. "Mom, I remember dropping you off at the hospital. You were there all day." Jennifer told you I was getting confused, didn't she? That I was making poor decisions? Marcus nodded slowly. No. His voice was barely a whisper. She said everything was normal family planning. That married couples automatically had rights to help aging parents with paperwork. Did you ever see me sign these documents? No. Jennifer always handled the paperwork side of things. She said it was her job, that she understood legal stuff better than we did. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, she told me you were getting worse. That you needed help but were too proud to ask for it. I showed him the bank security footage on my phone, the video of a woman 20 years younger than me walking into First National Bank, claiming to be me. That's not you, he said, staring at the screen. No, son. It's not. Marcus set down the papers and put his head in his hands. She played us against each other. She made me think you were losing your mind, and she made you think I was betraying you. Family manipulation destroys trust for generations. Subscribe to learn the warning signs. Protect your relationships before it's too late. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Anything. Did Jennifer suggest the sudden wedding? The courthouse ceremony without telling me? He was quiet for a long time. She said you were planning to object to the marriage. That you'd threaten to cut me out of your will if I married her. Another lie. I'd never threatened any such thing. She said if we got married quietly, it would give you time to adjust to the idea without the pressure of a big ceremony. I felt a familiar mix of rage and relief. Rage at how completely Jennifer had manipulated both of us. Relief that my son hadn't knowingly betrayed me. Marcus, I said gently, I've been saving money for your wedding since you graduated college. I had a ring ready for your bride, whoever she turned out to be. All I ever wanted was to be part of your happiness. He looked up at me with the same expression he'd had as a little boy when he'd accidentally broken something precious. Mom, what do we do now? Before I could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and his face changed. What is it? Jennifer. She wants me to meet her tonight. She says she has something important to tell me about the court case. I felt a chill. Marcus, don't go alone. He agreed to testify. The next morning, she filed for divorce. I have to go, he said, standing up. But Mom? I'm going to fix this. I don't know how, but I'm going to fix this. As he left Ruth's house, I wondered if Jennifer knew she was about to lose her primary weapon, my son's loyalty. The answer came 12 hours later. The courtroom was packed when they read the charges: elder abuse, identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. She sat perfectly still as her world collapsed. Jennifer Johnson Reed entered the criminal courtroom Tuesday morning wearing a navy blue suit and sunglasses, flanked by 2 attorneys. She moved with the same confidence she'd shown throughout this ordeal, as if she still believed she could talk her way out of the evidence. She was wrong. District Attorney Michael Rodriguez had spent 2 weeks building the criminal case. Sarah Chen sat next to me in the front row, explaining what would happen as we waited for proceedings to begin. Margaret, this isn't a trial yet. This is the formal charging hearing where they'll read the criminal counts and Jennifer will enter her plea. The courtroom was fuller than I'd expected. Ruth sat behind me with Tom from next door. Several other neighbors had come, people who'd watched the harassment campaign against my house. Word had spread through our community about the case, and apparently people wanted to see justice done. Jennifer's lead attorney stood when Judge Harrison called the case. Your Honor, my client is prepared to enter a plea of not guilty to all charges. District Attorney Rodriguez rose to read the formal charges. The state of Oregon charges Jennifer and Johnson Reed with the following: Count 1, elder abuse in the first degree. Count 2, identity theft in the first degree. Count 3, fraudulent use of a credit card. Count 4, forgery in the first degree. Count 5, computer crime. Count 6, conspiracy to commit theft. The charges took 3 minutes to read completely. Each count carried a potential sentence of up to 5 years in prison. Public justice or private settlement? Which would you choose? Judge Harrison looked at Jennifer directly. Mrs. Johnson-Reed, do you understand these charges? Yes, Your Honor. Her voice was steady, but I could see tension in her shoulders. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor. District Attorney Rodriguez requested high bail, pointing to Jennifer's access to fraudulent financial accounts and her demonstrated pattern of deception. Your Honor, the defendant has shown sophisticated knowledge of identity theft techniques and has already demonstrated flight risk behavior by attempting to liquidate the victim's assets. Jennifer's attorney argued for low bail, claiming she was a local resident with community ties and no prior criminal record. Judge Harrison set bail at $150,000, with conditions that Jennifer have no contact with me or any witnesses, and surrender her passport. As court ended, I watched Jennifer conferring with her attorneys in urgent whispers. For the first time since this began, she looked truly worried. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Local news had picked up the story: elderly Oregon woman fights back against identity theft scheme. District Attorney Rodriguez spoke briefly to the cameras. This case represents a sophisticated elder abuse scheme that could have cost the victim her life savings and her home. We want other families to know these crimes are taken seriously. A reporter asked me how I felt about the charges. Relieved, I said simply. But mostly I hope other families will learn to watch for the warning signs. That afternoon, Marcus called me. Mom, Jennifer wants to talk settlement. Her attorneys think they can make this go away if we agree to drop the criminal charges. What did you tell them? I told them to talk to your attorney. This isn't about money anymore, Mom. It's about what she did to our family. The jury took just 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. But the real victory came 3 days later when Marcus filed his own police report. He discovered that Jennifer had also forged his signature on their marriage license application, listing him as divorced when he'd never been married before. She'd been lying to everyone from the very beginning. The trial was set for 6 weeks later. By then, Sarah's investigator had uncovered Jennifer's history: 2 previous marriages to elderly men, both ending in mysterious financial transfers just before the men died of natural causes. Jennifer Johnson-Reed wasn't just a thief. She was a predator. Every forged document. She used my social security number to get credit cards. 3 of them. With a combined balance of $47,000. Marcus sank into my kitchen chair, the same chair where he delivered the news about the secret wedding months ago. Mom, how do I fix this? Sarah's already working on it. Identity theft victims have legal protections. The debts will be removed from your credit report. We sat quietly for a few minutes, both of us processing how completely Jennifer had deceived everyone around her. I've been thinking, Marcus said finally. About the wedding. The real wedding I should have had. I looked up at him. What do you mean? I want to redo it. With you there. With our family there. A real ceremony that celebrates what marriage should be about. The money wasn't the real victory. The trust was. Marcus, you don't have to do that for me. I'm not doing it for you, Mom. I'm doing it for us. Jennifer stole our family moment, but she can't steal our future moments. That night, I called Ruth to share the news about the complete asset recovery. Justice served properly, she said with satisfaction. Ruth, how do I thank you for everything you've done? Margaret, you don't thank friends for being friends. You just pass it forward when someone else needs help. The court documents were filed and sealed. Jennifer Johnson-Reed would spend the next 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. My house was mine again. My accounts were restored. My family was healing. But most importantly, I'd learned something about my own strength that I'd never known before. When my son asked to redo the wedding with me present, I cried for the first time since this began. These were tears of joy. Marcus stood in my kitchen on a Saturday morning in December, holding a small white envelope. 6 months had passed since Jennifer's sentencing. The house felt warm again, filled with the sense of fresh coffee and the banana bread I'd been baking since 6 a.m. Mom, will you open this? Inside the envelope was a wedding invitation, printed on cream-colored cardstock with elegant gold lettering. Margaret Johnson requests the honor of your presence at the wedding of her son Marcus Johnson to his beloved Sarah Michelle Williams, Saturday, February 14th, at 2 p.m., St. Mary's Catholic Church. Sarah Williams? I looked up at Marcus with surprise. She's a nurse at the hospital. We met during one of your follow-up appointments with Dr. Webb. His face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. Mom, she knows everything that happened. She wants to meet you properly. What would you need to forgive this level of betrayal? Marcus, are you sure about this? After everything that happened. Mom, Jennifer taught me what fake love looks like. Sarah shows me what real love is. He sat down across from me, the same spot where he delivered the devastating news about his secret courthouse ceremony. She insisted we do this right. With our families. With celebration. With you. That afternoon, Sarah Williams came to my house for Sunday dinner. She was small and energetic, with laugh lines around her green eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. She brought homemade rolls and helped me set the table without being asked. Mrs. Johnson, she said as we prepared the meal together, Marcus told me about your grandmother's ring. I'd be honored to wear it, if you're comfortable with that. I stopped stirring the gravy and looked at her. You want to wear my grandmother's ring? Only if it feels right to you. Family heirlooms should stay in the family, passed down with love. That's when I started crying. Not the bitter tears I'd shed during the fraud case, but the soft, grateful tears that come when something broken gets mended better than before. We spent the afternoon planning the wedding. Real planning this time, with discussions about flowers and music and whether to have dancing. Sarah wanted to include traditions from both our families. She asked about my husband's military service, wondering if we could incorporate a memorial moment. He would have loved you, I told her as we looked through old photo albums. I wish I could have met him, she said, and I could tell she meant it. The new wedding ring came with a promise: no more secrets, no more lies. Marcus and Sarah were married on Valentine's Day in front of 127 people who loved them both. I walked down the aisle as mother of the groom, wearing the navy dress I'd bought for a wedding I thought I'd never attend. When the minister asked, "Who gives this man in marriage?" I stood up and said clearly, "His family does, with love and blessing." The reception lasted until midnight. I danced with my son, welcomed my new daughter, and felt my heart heal completely. I framed the court judgment next to our family photos. Not as a trophy, but as a promise that our story would never be erased again. My kitchen table became command central for something I never expected, helping other families recognize the warning signs of elder fraud. Word spread through the community about my case, and people started calling with questions about suspicious activities in their own families. Ruth and I created a simple checklist that we shared with anyone who'd listen. Watch for sudden changes in financial documents. Trust your instincts when signatures look wrong. Question rushed legal decisions, especially around marriages or major life events. Keep copies of all important papers in multiple secure locations. Never sign documents under pressure or without independent review. Sarah Chin helped us organize community education sessions at the local senior center. Every month, we'd meet with families to discuss protection strategies. The meetings grew from 5 people in January to over 30 by summer. Margaret's case shows that fighting back is possible, Sarah would tell each group. But prevention is always better than recovery. Marcus and his wife Sarah joined our education efforts. They shared their perspective on how manipulation can target adult children, turning them into unwilling tools against their own parents. I thought I was protecting my mother, Marcus would explain to other adult children in the audience. I didn't realize I was being used to isolate her. The most rewarding part was the letters. Families who'd recognized warning signs early and taken action. Adult children who'd questioned suspicious paperwork and discovered fraud before it progressed. Elderly parents who'd felt empowered to seek help instead of suffering in silence. One letter came from a woman in California whose daughter-in-law had tried similar tactics. Your story gave me courage to investigate when something felt wrong. We caught the fraud before she could steal anything. My son and I are closer now than we've been in years. Another came from a man in Texas. My father was showing me documents that looked suspicious. I remembered your case and insisted we get handwriting analysis. The signatures were forged by his new friend. Dad's assets are safe and he learned to trust his instincts. The investigative reporter who'd covered my case wrote a follow-up article 6 months later, The Margaret Johnson Case, How One Woman's Fight Against Elder Fraud Sparked a Movement. But the real legacy was simpler than newspaper articles or community awards. It was Marcus calling every Sunday just to chat. Sarah bringing homemade soup when I had a cold. Ruth and I taking our morning walks and solving the world's problems over coffee. Tom from next door shoveling my driveway without being asked. It was my house feeling like a home again, filled with legitimate legal documents, genuine family photos, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can protect what matters most. If this story showed you the power of persistence, subscribe for more stories of ordinary people fighting extraordinary battles. Your family's legacy depends on knowing these warning signs. The framed court judgment sits next to a photo from Marcus and Sarah's real wedding, next to my husband's military portrait, next to Christmas pictures with grandchildren I hope to meet someday. Some battles choose you. But victory belongs to those who document the truth and never stop fighting for what's right. Last week, I received a call from an 82-year-old man whose son had suddenly married a woman who was asking suspicious questions about property transfers. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "I heard about your case. I think I need help." I picked up my pen and started taking notes. The fight continues, one family at a time. Share one lesson from this story that every family needs to know.